Good morning and good afternoon to all of you who have joined us from all across the world. My name is Raj Kumar. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the valedictory session of the Global Virtual Conference on Reimagining and Transforming the Future of Law Schools and Legal Education, organized by the Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India and Member of Parliament, and Honorable Mr. Justice U.U. Lalit, Judge, Supreme Court of India, to this conference. Both of your presence here today has indeed made this conference very special. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a very unfortunate and perhaps one of the most unprecedented crises of our time. A few months ago, we at Jindal Global Law School made an unimaginable digital transformation to ensure our commitment of academic continuity to our students. Having witnessed this, we then wanted to be able to use our experience to make a larger impact on the youth across the globe in ensuring that we make the desired transformation of our law schools, not only in terms of COVID-19, but even after. A few weeks ago, this very vision to create a global impact in these difficult times started as a conversation to create a forum where we could give birth to a new imagination for legal education and the future of law schools. What started as a small idea very soon grew to become an aspiration to create a global platform, a forum which today had witnessed 171 thought leaders coming together from 6 continents and over 35 countries to engage, to generate important dialogues with a global perspective. I am sincerely humbled by the support we've received from these leaders across the globe, which included law school deans, scholars, Supreme Court judges, lawyers, law firm partners, and representations from all spheres of the legal profession and legal education. The thought-provoking discussions across the last 3 days have been truly inspiring for reimagining the future of law schools. While we started just a couple of days ago at the crack of dawn in the West, the intellectual deliberations across the day went on till midnight to welcome the rising sun in the East. And across the conference, we've had over 50 hours of live streaming across 3 days. Living through multiple time zones across 3 days of invigorating dialogues is perhaps why we were able to generate diverse views and create a new imagination for the future of legal education globally. We had registrations, viewership, and participation from over 40 countries across 6 continents of the world. We witnessed over 6,000 views on average every day, resulting in nearly over 20,000 views over the entire conference period across various streaming platforms, including Facebook and YouTube, where we broadcasted the event. Discussions include thematic sessions and plenary addresses and lectures spanning across all hours of the day for 3 continuous days, bringing together senior leaders from across the world. The conference brought together diverse range of perspectives from countries including Australia, Bangladesh, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, France, Germany, Hong Kong SAR, Indonesia, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mexico, Nepal, New Zealand, Nigeria, Qatar, Russia, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, Tanzania, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Turkey, Uganda, Uruguay, and India. The Middle East or South Asia, Africa or Latin America, there were law schools represented from a wide range of regions across the world. We witnessed special discussions to celebrate India's Constitution Day. The Constitution Day lecture was delivered by Dr. Justice Chandrachud, Judge of the Supreme Court of India, and there were reflections by Professor Upendra Baxi. We also had a Constitution Day forum in which Justice Geeta Mittal, Chief Justice of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, delivered a keynote address, and we also had special addresses by other individuals, including Ms. Geeta Ramaseshan. Of course, the conference was inaugurated by the Indian Law Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, and had also the presence of leading law firm partner, Mr. Cyril Shroff. This conference has indeed been a true celebration of the strength of diversity to reimagine the future of legal education during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. As we have now completed 31 thematic sessions and 7 plenary addresses already, we will now have 2 very special plenary addresses as a part of our validity session today. To begin these very special addresses, I would like to now call upon Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi to deliver the valedictory lecture. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi is a senior advocate and 3-term sitting member of parliament. He was India's youngest designated senior advocate at 34 and India's youngest appointed additional solicitor general at age 37 in 1997. Over the past decades, he has been the common factor in almost all landmark Supreme Court cases spanning constitutional law, corporate law, and arbitration, and several other subjects. Besides his legal practice, he also serves as the senior-most national spokesperson of the Congress Party and has been opening as the lead speaker for the Treasury Congress benches in Parliament for almost every major debate from 2006 to 2013. He's the former chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice. Apart from this, he has done some sterling work over 12 years in Rajasthan from his MP-led fund supporting 400 projects in the fields of health and education. He was awarded the Global Leader for Tomorrow Award by the World Economic Forum at Davos in 1999. Dr. Singhvi is a well-known author and columnist and a visible media personality. His columns have appeared in India's 2 top English dailies and have been published, and has also published 2 books titled Candid Corner and Straight Talk. And his most recent book on emergency, the state of emergency, is just being published by The Springer. He is also an occasional columnist in major Hindi dailies, Dainik Bhaskar and Rajasthan Patrika. In addition to his other roles, Dr. Singhvi also supports many charities, including the Prayas Center for Destitute Children and the Singhvi Scholarship at Trinity College, University of Cambridge. Without further ado, let me call upon Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi to deliver his valedictory address.
Honorable Mr. Justice Lalit, someone we sorely miss at the bar, but are proud to know that the best is yet to come from the bench where he has defected. Vice Chancellor Rajkumar, distinguished participants, deans, teachers, students, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Raj, for a very generous, over-generous introduction. A valedictory session, friends, has several connotations built into it. The most dangerous one is that it's a pompous-sounding alternative for a concluding address. The problem with a concluding address is that those assembled start looking for the conclusion and ignore the address. In particular, when the fundamental human right to dinner of some and to lunch of others is in jeopardy, that competition naturally becomes a little unequal. But I am taking liberty and seeking your permission to encroach upon your fundamental rights for a little longer, mainly on account of the vital significance of the theme today. Let me start by congratulating the organizers under the able and dynamic leadership of Vice Chancellor Rajkumar, a man for all good causes, for all good seasons. He seems to have achieved a possible entry into the Guinness Book of Records, having this conversation spread over 3 days, all hours of the day, 170 thought leaders, 35 or 31 themes, 35 countries, legal culture spread across 6 continents. To get 100 law school deans itself is an amazing feat. As somebody put it, it takes a lot of planning to organize this kind of chaos. William Dement, and remember the topic he has chosen for this valedictory is reimagining and transforming the future of law schools and legal education. William Dement talked decades ago about dreaming. He said, dreaming permits each and every one of us to be quietly and safely insane every night of our lives. And what is imagination or reimagination but another form of dreaming? Reimagination is the kind of insanity which can sometimes be very fruitful, sometimes very infectious, sometimes very delectable, and sometimes very delicious. It is only reimagining and dreaming which allows us to push the envelope of our potential higher and higher. As Conrad wrote, he said, only in men's imagination does every truth find an effective and undeniable existence. Imagination, he said, not existence, is the supreme master of art as of life, unquote. Well, friends, legal education and law schools are the bedrock, the foundation whose quality, whose workmanship, solidity determines the beauty and the longevity and functional utility of its superstructure. And what is that superstructure? one of law students, law teachers, practicing advocates, corporate lawyers, legal advisors, consultants, and legal facilitators, who in turn form the backbone of any rapidly transforming economy. Over a half a century ago, President Dr. Radhakrishnan, himself one of the greatest teachers ever, lamented, and I quote, and this is interesting, it is more than half a century ago, in fact longer, "Our colleges of law do not hold a place of high esteem, either at home or abroad, nor has law become an area of profound scholarship and enlightened research." Unquote. We have undoubtedly traveled many miles since that lament, but we have to ask ourselves, honestly, self-critically, and transparently, whether we have significantly altered the landscape of legal education away from the heart and soul of that lament, that legitimate lament, I would call it. Yes, we have a small number of dynamic and outstanding law schools, but do they remain islands of excellence amidst a sea of institutionalized mediocrity? And what about the second part of that lament? Are we even marginally nearer to those two crucial phrases in Dr. Radhakrishnan's formulation, namely profound scholarship and enlightened research? Let me start, friends, with a few general points before I come to the more substantive points. As you leave this consultation, you must marry the paradigm role of a lawyer in society with the endeavors of our law schools. One role of the lawyer is to be a balance wheel, a harmonizer, a reconciler. He must be more than simply a skilled legal mechanic. In a larger sense, he must also be a legal architect, an engineer, and builder, and from time to time an inventor as well. Secondly, in the important task of nation building, our efforts in the field of legal education have to contribute not only to GNP, gross national product, but more importantly to GNM, gross national mind. It is trite to say that the character of law schools determines the character of the bar and indeed of the bench. And these two, as you know, are the two wheels of the chariot of justice. Thirdly, we must avoid time wastage by seeking to reinvent the wheel each time a new dispensation takes charge. There already exists a wealth of jurisprudence on the subject, a vast corpus of literature, including the valuable experience of eminent and experienced practitioners. Rather than reinventing the wheel, we have to focus on two things. One, to tie up this vast and diverse data on legal education into a simple, uniform national legal education plan. And secondly, to implement it with a capital I in a consistent, continuous, and coherent manner. The gap in India, as we all know, has always been between promise and implementation. Lastly, much of what follows in my valedictory address is focused on the democratization of law schools and of legal education. We must not forget, friends, that as in many spheres, there are many Indias in one, and this applies no less to legal education. While there is need to create more islands, like for example, the Institution of Eminence, which Jindal Law School has become in a record time under the leadership of Vice Chancellor Kumar, there is also a far greater need to uplift the average standard, the facilities of many of the struggling anonymous 1,500 law schools in this country. May we create more and more Mercedes Benzes and even Rolls Royces, but the strengthening of our backbone depends on the strengthening of the Marutis and the ambassadors. And that cannot be neglected. In other words, we have to spread distributive equity over inclusive legal education. Chief Justice Anand's words in 1988, again, more than 30 years ago, were hurtful but truthful. He had said, I quote, "The symptoms afflicting legal education in our country are clear and well recognized. They include in particular poverty of academic resources." Each phrase is relevant even today. "Dearth of professional excellence and a drought of meaningful research." Our law teachers, in whose hands rests the awesome responsibility of molding and teaching every future lawyer and every future judge in our country, today, he said, largely stand marginalized, demoralized, unrecognized, and unrewarded. Sadly, the truth of what he said 32 years ago reverberates even today. Let me now turn to the several issues I want to raise. It's almost 14 in number, but I shall finish within time. And try and see whether on the substantive side we can sew them up into a holistic whole, and that whole is with the WHOLE. Firstly, friends, there is the issue of making our legal curricula multidisciplinary, creative, and flexible. Largely, at the moment, it is the antithesis of this: rigid, inflexible, pedantic, stereotyped. It is only relatively recently, for example, that areas like ethics in the profession, reforms in justice delivery system, beating the backlog, clinical legal education, practitioners' workshops, legal writing, and so on and so forth, several examples. Similar contemporary emerging areas have been given their legitimate due, but that is still geographically very partial. In terms of distribution across law schools, very, very partial indeed. There is thus an urgent need to integrate these and other areas into a national uniform course module with fewer exceptions and fewer divergences. Connected to this, of course, is the fact that sadly, our teaching methods have not radically evolved after the introduction of the case study method in India in the 70s. That itself has been, to some extent, a theoretical introduction. Indeed, the curriculum of law colleges and law schools in India does not differ fundamentally from the curricula of law schools in Anglo-Saxon countries more than 40 to 50 years ago. For example, a typical law student in India may have about 9 to 10 optional subjects to choose from. A student at a leading US law school will be able to choose from amongst 200 to 300 offerings. Not that I recommend such a diversity. It's a bit too much. There are two extremes we are giving. Furthermore, as a remarkable philosophical thinker, Acharya Mahapragya said, he said that our educational system, and this applies equally to law education, puts the highest premium on memory, followed by lesser emphasis on intellect, and followed, he said, with the least importance on intuition. He added that the sequence should be exactly the reverse. There again, most of this has not happened. Secondly, there is the very serious problem of law teachers, or rather the lack of them. A vexed problem, a most serious problem of numbers, of quality, of diversity, and of depth. If I had a magical wand, the first thing I would want to do is to create a law school to produce only law teachers of exceptional quality who would be builders and engineers of young legal minds. When we look for faces to head new law schools, and I have, just like I'm sure Justice Lalit and some of you others have, sat on selection boards and governing boards, whenever we look for faces to head new law schools, we have precious few to choose from, and the same few faces rotate. We have to work urgently to end this structurally embedded drought and famine of top quality law teachers. For this, an obvious need is to reform and to provide more uniform but calibrated and better salaries with considerably improved terms of service. Law teaching is simply incapable of attracting brilliant young minds to the teaching profession without at least a partial shortening of the substantial and otherwise unbridgeable financial gap between leaders of the bar and the legal profession. Reciprocally, those under such special remunerative schemes, which we must make fast, have to be bound by valid legal instruments, bonds with appropriate legalese, to teach for a minimum duration without straying into the greener pastures of corporate lawyering and litigation. But the start of this initiative, at least as a pilot project, is to create an alternative remunerative scheme not hidebound by the present shackles of bureaucratic system. This can happen only by ushering in more and more public-private institutions where greater autonomy and special financial terms must, and this is important, be reciprocally subjected to the strictest standards of scholarship. A 2010 recommendation, and imagine it's 10 years ago, wrote that at the very minimum, salary should be as per the 6th Central Pay Commission, irrespective of the status of the institution, statutory or private, but it still languishes at the level of implementation. Thirdly, friends, our law libraries are too few and woefully stocked or understocked. there is an urgent need for providing the latest technological tools of research by linking each law school with the best sources of knowledge globally. And today, you don't need a physical library as much as virtual access. If necessary, a library cess levied only on senior advocates across the country must be designed for maximum ground impact, and it must be focused to our urban and our rural hinterland, quay libraries. The 184th Law Commission, and that again was far back in 2002, again called for a statutory amendment for this, and that again has simply not happened. Fourthly, internships and post-degree placements have to be sewn up into a national scheme to give it an organized impetus. Today, placements are ad hoc with no institutionalized system of matching applicants and recipients. Some students, especially those with contacts, have the luxury of plenty, while several of their talented, more talented, but less resourceful colleagues go a begging for placement. There is no objective evaluation system by the chamber head, uninfluenced by contacts in the profession. What is missing is an organized, computerized national plan with a systematic and objective evaluation scheme. It's simply a question of creating such structures which are uniform, not ad hoc, not episodic, not Delhi-centered, etc. Fifthly, there is an urgent need to draw a compulsory national scheme whereby senior advocates and other established practitioners with experience and expertise in particular areas, on invitation, compulsorily take a minimum number of hours of classes as per an established course curricula in different lesser endowed law institutions. Whether virtual or physical doesn't matter. Those lectures should be made a part of the student's evaluation. I have no doubt that practitioners of my profession will not grudge this minimal giving back. But again, everybody is hunting for a methodical, comprehensive scheme which is yet to be devised. Recently, when I was invited as a so-called distinguished fellow to deliver a set of 8 lectures on constitutional law at Jindal, spread over 2 months, I not only re-experienced the thrill of my days as a student and then as a researcher at Cambridge, but actually learned much more than I taught. This flexibility and innovative approach is simply missing amidst our bureaucratic legalese. The legal educational sector, the bar, the bench, the corporate legal sector, law firms, the profession in general, continue to function in silos, resplendent in isolated splendor. The exact opposite, close, continuous, coordinated alignment is the need of the hour. Incidentally, a great opportunity to teach comparative SARC law and other comparative regional perspectives in law was lost in the nascent SARC University simply because SARC itself has been in the doldrums. And I must strike a personal note of sadness because I am a former president of SARC law, and despite our efforts, that particular regional perspective has been a non-starter, mainly because the parent body is itself in the doldrums. Sixthly, one expects even experienced and established lawyers, judges, and other law persons to submit to periodic and continuing legal education programs without standing on pomp, show, or seniority. There are revolutionary changes in information, communication, and technology, and highly specialized areas of law require specialized training and skills. All of us, including judges, and I'm not suggesting the judges should be tested, but they should participate, should be ready for such short, structured, continuing legal education capsules. But again, such quality structures have not been created. I remember almost 30 years ago, as part of an Indo-US study team, whose report I had the privilege of co-authoring and which ultimately was enacted as Section 89 into our CPC in 1999 with effect from 2002, providing a menu card of ADR options in India. I remember seeing with incredulity in San Francisco in the 90s, mid-90s, sitting US Court of Appeal federal judges in informal clothes, attending as serious students, taking notes on the latest techniques of ADR. A single Bhopal academy is too little to fulfill this gap. Seventhly, we already know why we cherish many of our national law schools, not all, some of them, many of them. When we started them in the late 70s and 80s, 3 important innovations were added to legal education. One providing academic autonomy by making the law school a standalone university. Second, entrance through a strictly merit-based admission system based on a written test. And thirdly, an integrated professional 5-year law program. There was a fourth addition in terms of innovative teaching methods, along with a more updated curriculum that reflected current policy challenges. Now, it doesn't require rocket science to do this, even if partially, at least in other Indian law institutions, be it 5-year or 3-year ones, away and apart from these islands of excellence. Eighthly, the Bar Council of India had as far back as 2009 resolved that all law schools, colleges should establish a legal aid clinic center for the purpose of providing inexpensive and efficient justice to the needy sections of our society. It had also resolved that a lecturer shall be the faculty in charge of a legal aid clinical center, and that final year students would be trained as such legal aid clinical centers in imparting professional legal advice and client interaction. This mandate again has mostly been observed in the breach. There are, of course, as I said, episodic ad hoc attempts, but again, I'm talking for a national plan. Ninth is extremely important and something on which Vice Chancellor Rajkumar has had correct and strong views. The stratification of law colleges and its negative impact has to be something which is to be addressed. Laws relating to universities and higher education institutions in India remain complex and multi-layered, and they mostly overlap with multiple regulatory bodies overseeing the same set of institutions. Law colleges are located in public universities set up by both Parliament on the one hand and state legislatures on the other. Central universities set up by Parliament, be it Delhi or Aligarh, have their law faculty operating as the law school of that university. State universities like Calcutta or Mumbai also have similar departments, but mostly become affiliating universities, where private law colleges set up by private trusts and societies are affiliated. The major problem facing Indian legal education today is this affiliated law college system of state government universities. There is an institutionalized mediocrity and a dilution of academic standards in a large number of these affiliated law institutions. This is manifested in many of them not having adequate and qualified faculty or law libraries, lack of e-resources, that matter even lack of conduct of regular classes and examinations. Mushrooming of law schools and mass production of somewhat incompetent lawyers across the country in various states have contributed to the dilution of standards, both in the legal education and both in the legal profession. I was stunned to note as a striking example, for example, and purely by way of illustrating example, 3 state government universities of Western Uttar Pradesh, namely Meerut, Agra, and Kanpur, respectively have 107, 40, and 67 law colleges affiliated to them. These 214 affiliated law colleges have given 25,000 seats in LLB program alone. Their quality in reports have left much to be desired. Such stratification of law colleges with various legal, regulatory, institutional, and governance structures have undermined the development of quality standards, have undermined the creation of at least a semi-uniform academic ecosystem and the pursuit of excellence in many law schools in India. Tenthly, phasing out of existing law colleges must be swiftly completed. You'll be surprised to know that Madras High Court in 2017 held that 85% of law colleges in India must be closed to maintain the sanctity of the legal profession. I don't necessarily agree with that high figure, but it gives you an idea of what extremes we are functioning at. For those of you who haven't checked up the figures, we have 1,500 law colleges as of last year. In 2000, we had 800 law colleges, or a little less than 800. And as late as 2010, it was only 900. So 2,800, 2010, 900, and last year, 1,500. So we've added almost 600 law colleges in the last 9 years without giving due consideration to the needs of the profession or the availability of suitable opportunities. One of the major reforms needed in legal education is to close down at least 500 mediocre, dubious, and substandard law colleges. Many of them have made legal education simply a profit-making business endeavor. There was a similar suggestion by the Bar Council in the past. Media has published stories which sometimes makes us hang our heads in shame. For example, the sale of LLB degrees for a few thousand rupees. The sale of such degrees without attending a single lecture. And BCI itself has started some years ago a campaign, I don't know with how much success, to weed out what they call fake lawyers with forged law degrees. 11thly, what is required is reform of the entire legal education and not just of the national law schools, where of course some reform is required. It is sad that not one of the Indian law schools finds place in the top 300 law schools of the world. I repeat, not one in the top 300 of the world. And this is as per QS World University subject rankings last year. And QS is a well-known standard. I'm sure Professor Rajkumar is itching to become the first to enter this galaxy. Since 87...
Small correction, Dr. Singhvi. This year, we just entered it. And we are...
Right.
Yes,
good,
number
good.
one, along with NLS Bangalore, which is number 2. So both of us entered into the top 300 in the world.
Well, that makes my point. You finally in 2020 have 2 in the first 300. I had the figure for 2019. I'm so happy to hear, although I was guessing that you'd be very close to entering. Since 1987, when the first law school was set up in Bangalore, the focus of Indian higher education and judiciary shifted from the legal education being already imparted at almost 800 colleges in 1987, and then it became a few national law universities. Today, I don't know the exact figure, roughly about 24, 25 have been added to this country. But this unbridled growth has meant that a large number of NLUs, you'll be surprised to note, what to speak of other law schools, after 2008 have had to face significant challenges relating to quality standards and reputation. Then again, one must remember that NLUs impart legal education to a total of 2,500, maybe 3,000 students, approximately in a year. And that is not even 2% of total LLB students admitted in Indian law colleges in an academic year. If our entire legal education policy is directed towards improving the situation of 2% students, it is obvious that we are not doing justice, indeed injustice we are doing, to 98% of the law students. The figures may change, but the overwhelming skewed nature is what I'm trying to underline. 12thly, in our starry-eyed view of the 5-year courses, we must not forget to strengthen our 3-year LLB law program also. And I think the best model for this is the JD or the Juris Doctor program, so popular in the US and in Canada. Indian LLB program, 3-year program, must be made more rigorous and full-time. NLUs must themselves consider starting 3-year law programs as well and open their doors to the best Indian graduates to their 3-year programs. My 13th and penultimate point is to draw your attention to the unique aspect of legal education in USA, namely the deep and pervasive engagement with law firms in USA of corporations, non-governmental organizations, legal aid centers, think tanks, government agencies, intergovernmental organizations. Unfortunately, in India, legal academia and the legal profession are usually separated with little interaction, let alone collaboration. Unlike law firms in the US, Indian law firms have a rather limited role engagement within law schools and have been seen largely as recruiting platforms. No doubt it is changing, and no doubt my friend Cyril would have talked about it, but still the paradigm remains as a recruiting platform. The collaboration between domestic and international law firms and the law schools in India can lead to funding of research centers and endowments for chair professorships, faculty and student exchanges. Let me end by the 14th point by addressing the elephant in the room. Though I am liable to be misunderstood and be the recipient of brickbats. The Bar Council's role in legal education has also to be reimagined and restructured. The Bar Council's role in legal education, remember, it has too many functions: law reform, disciplining lawyers, setting standards, to do justice to a full-time job like legal education. The vicissitudes of electoral politics, sometimes too purple and too vicious, also willy-nilly compromise its independence and objectivity. I am aware that its entire exclusion of the Bar Council from its zealously and jealously guarded turf is not possible, and nascent attempts earlier have failed. Perhaps I can do no better than adopt the via media engineered by the 184th Law Commission report. It recommended that the statute be amended to require that the Bar Council must consult a broad-based legal education committee constituted together by the UGC and the Bar Council, which they thought would be diverse and broad-based, including 5 members from the Bar Council, so still a focus of the Bar Council, but additionally, 1 retired judge of the Supreme Court, 1 retired Chief Justice or Judge of a High Court, both to be nominated by the Chief Justice of India, 3 academicians to be nominated by the UGC. One of these 3 must be a director, vice chancellor of a statutory law university, with the retired judge being the chairman and having a casting vote. But most importantly, that recommendation required the statute to say that the Committee on Legal Education's recommendations or writings, including standards of legal education, must be implemented, and they would have no option not to implement. It also recommended that in case of any conflict in the inspection reports between the Bar Council and the UGC, this is another very big problem. There are all kinds of allegations and counter allegations about inspection reports. They recommended, remember, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, a task force with the judicial officer to make the inspection in case of any differences. Indeed, I believe that the Bar Council should go further and consider establishing a separate independent National Council for Legal Education and Research. Of course, any of this, even a part of this, would bring in much needed objectivity and purity in the system. Well, friends, there is no 15th point, lest you are all terrified of my pointillism. It is only such innovations and out-of-the-box thinking that will successfully meet G.M. Trevelyan's warning. Trevelyan, a great educationist decades ago in the UK, had said, quote, "Education should not throw up a vast population able to read, but unable to distinguish what is worth reading." As I conclude, and I wish you all Godspeed and success, I must remind you of Aristotle, who said, education, and that of course includes legal education, is an ornament in propriety and a refuge in adversity. We have to capture that promise and that premise into our legal education national plan. And as we do so, friends, through conversations and consultations like this, we must also remember the solemn words of H.G. Wells. Human history, he said, more than anything else, is a race between education and catastrophe. Humanity has fortunately been always winning that race, but your object, the object of deans and universities and vice chancellors, should be to considerably enhance that winning margin for legal education. What India needs and wants is a new electric fire to stir up fresh vigor in the national veins. There is no doubt that frequently there are roadblocks, pessimisms, and the nature of the problem appears too large, too complicated, impossible to solve, and you appear to be lonely, alone, and in a minority of one. That is when Tagore reminds you to do Ekla Chalo. That is when Gandhi's description of a good reform movement becomes relevant. Gandhi had said, and there is nobody else who has gone through fire for reform movements, he said that such a movement must go through 5 stages: indifference, ridicule, abuse, repression, and finally, respect. It is for you to find out where you are on the scale, but as long as you are moving in the right direction, success is bound to be yours. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singhvi, for a comprehensive tour de force and indeed a very compelling and inspiring valedictory address. We couldn't have had a better valedictory address as we complete the 3 days of the conference. the many issues that you raised in relation to shaping the future of legal education and which will impact the legal profession not only resonates with some of the challenges that we face in India, but also it resonates with the challenges that law schools and legal education face around the world. I'm grateful to you for your time and indeed your commitment to sharing these perspectives in your valedictory address. Let me have the great pleasure to invite and welcome Honorable Mr. Justice UU Lalit, Judge of the Supreme Court of India, to deliver the presidential address. Justice Lalit joined the bar in June 1983 and began his legal practice as an advocate in the High Court of Bombay from 1983 to 1985. He later started practicing in the Supreme Court of India in 1986 and worked with the former Attorney General, Mr. Soli Sorabji, from 1986 to 1992. In 2004, the Supreme Court of India designated him as a senior advocate, and he's widely known for his specialization in criminal law and for his stellar contributions in conducting some of the most important criminal trials, as demonstrated in his appointment as CBI's Special Public Prosecutor in all 2G matters by the Supreme Court in 2011 to ensure fair prosecution in that case. Prior to his elevation as judge, Justice Lalit also served as a member of the Supreme Court's Legal Services Committee for 2 terms. Justice Lalit holds a unique distinction of being the 6th senior advocate ever to be directly elevated to the Supreme Court of India, when in August 2014, he was appointed to the Supreme Court as a judge, and in July 2020, joined the Supreme Court Collegium, which consists of 5 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court. Most importantly, Justice Lalit is a self-effacing judge with values of humility and simplicity and honesty and rectitude, and easily accessible to members of the bar as well as the legal education community. I'm grateful to him for his time, and I invite him now to deliver the presidential address. Justice Lalit.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, and what a brilliant and thought-provoking address it was. We'll ever be grateful. Dr. Singhvi, Vice Chancellor Rajkumar, other esteemed dignitaries, good evening to and namaste to everyone.